And now the survival show that once survived a serious debate about black or brown boots with khaki 511 pants. In this episode, Joey King of Bites of Man drops in. We discuss WTF with cryptocurrency and the whole wide world of digital scarcity. Howdy and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 284. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole. Safe and sound. A quick note before we dive into this episode, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're watching this on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and ring that bell if you're into that kind of thing. Hey, quick disclaimer. Here's the thing. You're going to listen to two guys on the interwebs talk about money. So here's your big warning. Do your own homework, invest in things at your own risk. This is for entertainment purposes only. We're not giving you financial advice of any kind. I am not responsible for the shenanigans you get up to. In fact, I might not even be wearing pants today. Again, two guys on the interwebs talking about things. You've been warned. With that out of the way, now on to today's guest. Joey, welcome back to the rabbit hole.
Hey, great to be back.
So, man, late 2018, 2019, and the whole world of cryptocurrency. It's not, it's easy to just say Bitcoin, but it's all of it has just kind of been,
Yeah, it's pretty devastating. There's not a lot to be optimistic about, especially from the mainstream perspective.
Mm-hmm.
From the outside looking in, everything looks quite terrible.
Yeah.
Blood in the streets type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
From the inside, yes, there are certainly things to be optimistic about. There are a lot of metrics that have continued more or less unabated.
Okay.
Such as hash power, infrastructure investment, and most importantly, I think development activity. But none of those are highly visible.
Okay.
And none of those you feel directly in your pocketbook the way you do, say, with like price and other activity.
Yeah.
And of course, the pocketbook stuff is what can really have an impact in the real world, what makes everybody feel a little bit happier, which can encourage some more investment.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, 2017, we saw too much of that. I don't think anybody's really going to argue. Like, so many projects in 2017 never should have existed and really only had a chance of existing by what they could promise, what they could hype, what they could convince people into. And this is a bit of a filter for that. It's similar with other commodities where, you see oil prices go down in places like Texas, and all of the commodity producers who had shit business models or really shouldn't have been out there or weren't competitive get eliminated. Yeah. So everybody's forced to be a little bit more competitive. And it's another one of those anti-fragility tests in terms of the crypto market. Who's a charlatan.
And I think, and that makes a good point. I remember even in a business I was involved in that was heavily retail and online commerce, every time it was a very old, long running business. And every time there was some sort of downturn, everybody got real nervous, but our best innovations and our best operations efficiencies and our best just trimming of the fat and cutting the waste happened during those times. Obviously, it's when it's famine, you're going to be really careful about what you're doing. And then when we would come into boom times, man, we would come roaring in because we had done so much work to streamline things, make things efficient, get rid of things that just didn't need to exist. Sometimes people that didn't need to exist within the context of the business. Nobody died. So I guess in that way, it's good. I think so. I guess did a lot of the stupid coins and nonsense coins, we'll call them, did a lot of those kind of get flushed out during this?
Some did, but I'd say a surprising amount did not.
Really?
And that's kind of my big canary in the coal mine of like, oh, wow, like maybe it's still going to get much, much worse, because there's still some projects out there that have, dozens of millions of market cap. And it's like, what exactly does this coin do here? So I'll see if I can look through and point some of those out. But the other thing I wanted to add in terms of like the bear market and commodity cycles is, as devastating as it is right now, this is when people get rich, right? Mm-hmm. All the people who got rich in 2017 didn't do it because they bought Bitcoin at the, exceedingly heady price of 15K and sold it at 19K perfectly. Like, nobody did that. Never. If people did, they didn't get like filthy rich. The people who got filthy rich did it when they were buying, 2014 when Mt. Gox was getting hacked and everybody thought Bitcoin was dead, and all of the obituaries and all
Mhm.
the stores that used to take it weren't taking it anymore. And people who bought then at, $200, $300, like those people got super rich.
Mhm.
Or people who bought in even less exciting times, right? 2011, 2012, when it's just like 100 nerds on a forum talking about it. You
Yeah.
still had crashes from $35 down to $2. Like that, fortunes aren't made at the highs.
Yeah.
Fortunes are made, and then times like this, when you really have that opportunity to filter through it.
Yeah.
So in terms of some of the crypto projects that are not necessarily going away, that I think like, oh, okay, well, that's weird. This still has like a huge market cap.
Mhm.
IOTA, I definitely like to hate on IOTA, and like they're super defensive. So maybe I'll get some hate mail for that.
Sweet. I love hate mail.
There's a great website if you go check out www.shitcoin.com.
Okay.
And it's run by this guy Andreas Brecken, and of course, like everybody in the crypto community, people say he's a shill for one thing or another, and like everybody has their favorite projects.
Of course.
But he does give very unbiased, I would say, technical reviews. What he does is he'll try to use these projects, build it from their open source code, give his exact steps of like, here's how I set up a node, here's how I got it running, here's what I can actually do with it, here's how it might be able to be used, like here's what they say they're going to do and not. And the one for IOTA is just totally devastating. He's like, well, you can get something to work, but a caveat is it could never work for the Internet of Things, which is straight up what it's named for. And he goes, he provides some pretty compelling evidence, and he got a lot of internet hate for that because a lot of, IOTA was one of those, oh, maybe this is the next Bitcoin. Like I didn't get rich because I didn't buy it when everybody was in despair of the last Bitcoin bear market, but I'm going to get this now in mid 2017 and be a billionaire. But IOTA's market cap right now, let's see, almost $1 billion, $730 million. So you look at that and you're like, okay, well, that's still a lot of value for a project that may or may not have any technical basis at all.
Yeah.
I also, of course, love to hate on Ripple,
Okay.
Which I think their entire market proposition is that the value of their token, because of a huge supply, is very low in US dollar terms.
Mhm.
And it always remained very low in US dollar terms, although it got to $3. But it used to be a fraction of a cent.
Mhm.
So people who made money on Ripple made a shit ton of money,
Mhm.
and that gave it its own mystique,
Mhm.
all its own. And I think it's really just been chugging on that inertia. But there's, again, a whole tribe and community of people who are like, oh, no. Like, that's exactly why you got to buy Ripple, because it still has this attractive psychological price point. And it's this responsibly, man. People believe what they want to believe. And that's been true for thousands of years.
Right.
That's a Julius Caesar quote. And who's the guy? The guy who wrote about the Anabasis of Alexander says the same thing about people who are like, oh, yeah, well, they just believed that Alexander wasn't going to come lay siege to their city because people believe what they want to believe.
Yeah.
And you see that same stuff in crypto all the time.
Mhm.
As crypto, it's money, so it's politics, and it's tribal, and it's factional.
Yeah.
But to wrap it up, right, like while a lot of these projects have disappeared, you still have stuff like Tron, you still have stuff like IOTA, you still have stuff like Ripple, that have some shockingly high market caps.
Huh.
So it's difficult to say, like, wow, is this really cleaned out everything?
Mm-hmm.
Now, most of just the ICOs in 2017, I think, have been cleared out, and I'm not qualified to talk about it off the top of my head, but there's lots of news articles about that, and you can see, forget what percentage of them are now trading for much less than their ICO offering was, but it's definitely most of them.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you've seen that, and of course, nobody's doing ICOs now,
right?
Which means you do have a pretty compelling filter of like, well, if you're going to be doing a project with a cryptocurrency, there has to be a reason you need that cryptocurrency. The reason can't be to raise money for your speculative venture in the middle of a bull market,
right?
Which was the only reason in 2017.
Yeah.
So,
but
you do have that filter.
I keep hearing that financial institutions, mainstream financial institutions, I can't talk today, institutions, brand new mouth. So yeah. I keep hearing that mainstream financial institutions are pouring money in and investing in it and doing stuff, but it seems to be kind of under the radar. Nobody's really talking that much about it. Or am I just hearing nonsense?
I'll disagree that nobody's really talked that much about it. I think there's been a whole horde of people chanting and praying for when institutional, especially on the Bitcoin side, right? Like, oh, we're going to get this ETF. It's going to take us to the promised land. Or like, oh, these university endowment funds, or all these, like, the real money's coming. And on the one hand, I think they're a little hyper optimistic, but on the other hand, I think they're right. There is this interest. The endowment funds are starting to get positions in cryptocurrencies, and the prices today are, of course, a lot more attractive than they were in 2017. And as much as I disparage the conventional banking system, I have to hand to those guys. Like, they understand international finance, they understand commodity cycles, they understand how to make money a lot better than, some jackass on Reddit who thinks he's a genius. I've been that jackass, so like it's difficult for me to say.
We've all been that jackass on Reddit at some point.
These, as much as I want to disparage them, these guys aren't idiots.
Right.
They know they buy low and sell high.
Yeah.
And this is an attractive and potentially more controllable commodity market than anything else that they figured out how to control. Right? These guys can control the silver market. You think they can't control the fucking Bitcoin market? Like, no, the sharks are jumping in.
Yeah.
And they'll get in. Like, long term, it's going to be good. You're going to get more liquidity. You're going to get more volume because you actually do have a limited supply. In some respect, you'll probably see higher prices. At the same time, though, like, with the arrival of all these sharks, the limitation of supply gets a little jerked around with, the same way it does with gold, the same way it does with silver, right?
Yeah.
You'll have all sorts of derivative contracts. You'll have all sorts of, you own this Bitcoin, but actually, it's in this account over here, and like it's assigned to your name, and it'll get institutional, which is great on the one hand because you get more interest and liquidity and money. But not so great on the other hand, because a lot of what it was originally started for gets slowly eroded away. Now, with crypto, you still have the ability to use it yourself. If you want, you just build out the software, you do all your own stuff. But there's a technical barrier to entry with that, just having the ability. And with Bitcoin Core, once you have transaction levels where they were in 2017, and looks like they're going back that way, Bitcoin Core transaction count per day has been going up. Even through the whole bear market. But once those transaction fees become prohibitively expensive for individuals, then you are sort of, for all the talk of like, oh, mud decentralization and like, oh, unconfiscatable, like, but you force yourself to have it confiscated if you want to use it. You have to hypothecate it somewhere, or put it on an exchange, or even if you are like some whiz kid and you're setting up your own Lightning node, well, you got to send an on-chain transaction and then keep it there. And now you're worried about the actual security of your own Lightning node, and you might be running a server for 24 hours a day, or, well, you're trusting somebody else with it. So a lot of the sovereignty aspects of Bitcoin and crypto are getting more difficult. And of course, it's more difficult too when at these price levels, right? It's not like, oh, you bought Bitcoin 2 years ago, you can go buy an arsenal of M16s. Well, not anymore. You can't. So there's also these practical considerations.
Yeah.
But it becomes more difficult as institutions get in. The incentives are for those institutions to make as much money as possible, and that interest does not support your interest of keeping your money independent and controllable. And it's similar to these other state phenomena, right? Like, if you're taking a flight in the United States, I think maybe you still can refuse to do the body scanner thing, but you have to be patted down.
Yeah, you still get molested. So, yeah. Do you want to be irradiated or molested?
Yeah. So eventually you face these kind of difficult decisions, and the overwhelming majority of people are like, you know what, just do it for me. And then it's just the crazy people who are actually responsible. And even if maybe it still technically works, well, what's the vector on it? What's the rate of change? Is it getting more controlled? Is it getting less controlled? And how are you really going to be using this stuff?
Yeah. To kind of go off into something that was a little bit old, because I'm curious what is conventional or contemporary thought on this, or contemporary opinion. And I've been a little disconnected for the last few months from it. But it was funny. I was reading this book from technologist and professor John Gallagher, Information Systems and Manager's Guide to Harnessing Technology. And it was a new enough textbook that it had a whole chapter dedicated, or it was a subchapter dedicated to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. but I thought it was hysterical. It started off, to quote it here, it is the transaction method favored by cyber criminals, illegal drug trade networks like Silk Road, and online drug bazaars that was shut down. What? And that's how he began. He goes on to soften it some more as he gets down into the weeds. But I mean, that's basically how that subchapter begins. And it was just like, I hadn't even bothered going through this textbook. I hadn't even bothered looking at what the date of the book was till he said that. And I looked at it and I was like, what kind of, you're a technologist and this highfalutin professor of technology? Yeah. And I go look, and it's written in 2014. And I was like, well, one, why are we using a technology book from 2014? But okay, true. Do you think in general, public opinion has shifted away from cryptocurrency as just for illicit, naughty activities, or has it become a little more acceptable?
I'd say public opinion hasn't changed at all.
Okay.
Is it a little more acceptable? Yes. Mm-hmm. In any meaningful way? No.
Okay.
The huge chunk of people that got on board with cryptocurrency in the last bull market who now are excited about it and don't think it's for crime are mostly like moon boys and like the Reddit jackasses and like all of that stuff. You're not getting this like huge consolidation of people who are like, oh no, this is new money because central banking is bad. That's never the majority in movements like this, much to my chagrin. Mm-hmm. That's definitely not the majority today.
Yeah.
So if you ask any older person, right, and like, or even the CEOs of these banks, like what Jamie Dimon says about Bitcoin is pretty much the mainstream opinion. And I don't think that's an accident. Right. If anything, that's somewhat bullish on the potential of Bitcoin, that these institutions feel the need to have a certain narrative promulgated about what Bitcoin is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they want to keep stuff. Share. Yeah. They want to keep it suppressed until they can get in.
Well, absolutely. And it's not even just get in. I mean, you might keep it suppressed as long as you can.
Yeah.
Keep it suppressed until you've got the right infrastructure in place where it's mostly controllable, right? Because if you read a book about the US dollar, it's not introduced as, the US dollar is the number one currency for kidnapping, extortion, and drugs, which it is.
Yeah.
And which has always been. But nobody thinks about that because nobody was told to think about that. And most people are just assigned their opinions by the press. And with cryptocurrency, it's no different.
Yeah.
And if you look at the only way that cryptocurrency's been appearing in mainstream press is like, it's this thing that these crazy people made a lot of money and these crazy people lost a lot of money in drugs. End of story.
Yeah.
So that's still where we're at.
Yeah. Well, that's the news in general these days is such absolute nonsense.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Such absolute nonsense. I will point out one thing to his favor. He did actually use the lowercase L when discussing libertarians in the thing. The chapter was, I was just like, man, all right. What? So, and it was funny, before we started the recording, we were both just kind of like, about it. But because you work in the industry, what keeps you excited about crypto?
This stuff still works.
Mm-hmm.
It still works and still has the potential, right? There's still a motive to keep it down. There's still a motive to try to keep people from using it.
Mm-hmm.
It still has a better chance than anything else, I would say, of obsoleting global central banking by presenting a more mainstream, palatable, technical alternative.
Mm-hmm.
It's still not very close to that, but that's not going to happen with anything else.
Yeah.
So that's what people are still working on. That's what people are still building. That's what a lot of these projects are coming out. You're seeing, especially the more tech companies crack down and with censorship, well, that creates a little bit more demand for stuff that can't be censored.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean it's quick. It doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight. But this technology can do it,
mm-hmm.
and nothing else can. So you're getting these kind of gateways to this whole new internet and decentralized infrastructure. It's not just cryptocurrency. There's things like there's a white paper on this for the interplanetary file system.
Okay.
This is strictly Bitcoin related, but it's decentralized server infrastructure, effectively, where you're able to host files that are associated with a hash. So it's a way to like look up any file based on a hash in a decentralized manner.
Mm-hmm.
So you're still using the same infrastructure, right? You're still using the same cables and everything that's, nominally controlled by the state, but you're not using HTTP anymore. So if on top of that, you have some way where people are buying and selling their bandwidth, potentially for cryptocurrency, you can have an entire parallel internet, and steps could be taken to try to control that. But you have this arms race. And in all of these arms races now between established institutions who control infrastructure and technology that challenges those institutions and that infrastructure, I think it's advantaged hive mind. You're not getting like this team of geniuses working to control it anymore. And even if you do, right, the 10 smartest developers in the world, I don't think are going to be well matched against, millions and millions from everywhere, looking at every possible angle and with an economic incentive now with cryptocurrency to win. So you'll have an arms race, but I think it's advantage, independence movement, freedom movement, and disadvantage legacy institutions. It's still, as it is always, super frustrating if you're rooting for the underdog here, because most people don't care about this at all. And even the people who do care, well, people are people. And like, there's a lot of people who care who are still idiots, and frankly, like, not even that useful to have on your side. So there's still like all of the same human challenges and difficulties, within the industry today. Like, obviously, people aren't very happy right now. It's price levels, it's discouraging, it's difficult to stay optimistic. However, stuff is still being built out. It's still a contender. It's still, the worse the US dollar gets, the more in debt people get, the more dissatisfied people get with the status quo, the more ammunition you have, and these other projects continuing to grow and continuing to be used and continuing to really offer these freedom alternatives. I don't think you'll get the original dream, which everybody was, it'll just be Bitcoin. It'll be easy to use. It'll be cheap. It'll be so obvious. It'll be like the one world money. And all the banks are going to go away because they're mean. That's not going to happen. Right. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. But there will be options that allow individuals to kind of pick a little sliding scale and say, how much economic freedom do I want, and how much of a hassle am I willing to put up with for that? And everybody will have a certain amount of hassle that they're willing to deal with to get a certain amount of economic freedom. But the thing is, like, that's sliding. If you're only taking this much hassle, well, Bitcoin gets harder to use. You're like, I'd use the banks. Okay, well, great. Now there's hyperinflation. Are you really going to stick with the banks because like Bitcoin was a little difficult? No, now there's an economic incentive for that stuff to get better and easier to use and onboard more people. So you have this interesting tension between the legacy institutions and what's coming up with cryptocurrency.
And I think it's in like a simple way. What you were talking about makes perfect sense. I mean, it's the difference between going back to what we were talking about a minute ago. You want to get across country. Do you want to drive and be, not molested unless you get pulled over and something happens? Or, do you want to make a short trip of it and be irradiated and fondled by TSA? And a lot of people still choose, I'll just be fondled by TSA.
Sure.
Yeah. So it makes sense. But then there are plenty of people who, there's a lot of times where if I have an easy choice of drive or fly, I'm just like, I'll drive. But, like going to Costa Rica recently, I'm like, well, no, we're not driving there. So let's go get felt up at the airport.
Yeah.
So
it's not perfect, but it does at least offer an alternative.
Yeah. Well, and I think that some alternative is better than none.
Yeah.
So what you and I were talking about right before we got started here, that for you to just sort of prognosticate and pontificate for a moment here, what does 2019 look like in your mind, and just in your opinion? And we'll just say that this is your opinion. What does 2019 look like?
Well, I think the thing about commodity cycles is that they do tend to repeat themselves, and it's never going to be exactly the same. But if you look at what happened to cryptocurrency in the 2013 bull market, what's happened from 2013 to 2015 is very similar to what's happened from 2017 to 2019. So in 2013, Bitcoin shot up to the unimaginable value of $1,200 and then kind of slowly petered out towards the end of the year. And it was like 800. Oh, no, it's crashed. Okay, it's around $650. And it was there for like a couple of months. And then it's like, oh, no, it's $400, $500, $400. And this is like 2014, just settling around in the 400s-ish. And then Christmas 2014, boom, 400 right down to 190. And then 2015 was just this great sideways year. You know, it was like $200 to $270 for all of 2015. Now, if you look at what's happened price wise, bull market wise, 2017, right? Again, around Christmas 2017, you see this all time high of like $19.9 thousand for Bitcoin, and all of crypto's market cap was something like $750, $800 billion. But then it sort of retreats from that, calms down a little bit to about 15K, right? January, February. And everybody's like, oh, wow, that's quite a drop. Like maybe it's going to go back up. So again, look, 2014, it went from 1,200 down to around 680. And 2017, you know, it goes from 19,000 to around 15,000. And that's January, February. And everybody's like, okay, well, it's still up there. Now you get into like April, and it goes down to 6,500 or something like that. And everybody's like, oh, wow, like, well, it's quite low, but, you know, it's still much higher than it was a year ago. Then, you know, after tax season or so, it made another run up to maybe 9 or 10 grand. And then it settled back around 6 grand. It was hanging out there until around mid-November or so, and it had this big drop. Bitcoin Core goes down to the mid threes. Bitcoin Cash with its fork gets, you know, pretty much annihilated, goes from 500 to at one point as low as $70. And now it's back at like 120, something like that. But, you know, because it forked with BSV, the total value is maybe 250. So it was also about a 50% hit, similar to what Bitcoin Core took. But again, it's very similar to what happened at the end of 2014. When you were looking at Bitcoin Core at the time, and it was about $450 or so going into the end of 2014, and had that crazy drop, lost about half its value to about 200. And we've seen almost the exact same thing now happen almost the exact same amount of time after our last all-time high, with that 50% drop, except instead of from 400 to 200, it was from 6,500 to 3,500. And now here we are, beginning of 2019, at a very similar place, I think, to the beginning of 2015. Now, what happened in 2015 was prices for Bitcoin were about $220 to $270 for the entire year. Every once in a while, it'd be like, oh, it's this little run. It's insane. But I remember how excited I was. I'm like, oh, Bitcoin's up like $12. Can you believe it?
I remember.
Yeah, we'll probably see something similar this year is where I'm guessing, just based on how these cycles have repeated themselves, and like how the last almost 2 years have been shockingly quite analogous to what we saw in 2014 and 2015. What's different today is stuff to be excited about. As difficult as you can tell, I'm finding it to be excited right. Daily transaction count is way higher, especially on Bitcoin Core. Most of that, I think, is just, you know, there's baseline apps in place and like exchange traffic, but that's much higher, orders of magnitude higher. Exchange volume, orders of magnitude higher. The capability and profitability of exchanges, orders of magnitude higher. So everything is ready for a much bigger launch than you saw in 2017. And in 2017, that was true, that everything was ready for a much bigger launch than we saw in 2013. And then the other huge thing that's different is the mining and hash power. That's just, it's almost impossible to really describe it, right? I mean, we're something like 100 times higher hash power than we were before the last bull market. So at the beginning of 2017, it was about 5 exahash per second. That doesn't necessarily mean anything, but I'll just drop that number because, you know, it kept going up through 2018 and it peaked at around 55, right? So it 11x in a year, which was a giant bear market year. The price did nothing but go down all of 2018. And that's from, you know, 2017, start of the bull market, all the way to the end of the bear market. Hash rate increased 11 times. Hash rate increases in cryptocurrency are not necessarily short-term phenomena. Like, yes, it goes up, it goes down. People get eliminated. People aren't profitable. Stuff changes. That's an enormous opportunity cost. That represents real-world investment. People have invested in cryptocurrency mining as an alternative to other, you know, so-called real investments, right? These people could have bought public equities. These people could have bought gold. These people could have just parked their money in cash. Instead, they've invested in hard infrastructure that goes obsolete like every 2 months in one of the world's riskiest business endeavors. And this infrastructure doesn't just go obsolete. You also have to plug it in and pay that bill all the time.
Yeah, and it's not simple infrastructure.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
And it's there. And it's still like, it means you have a lot of people with skin in the game that still have an interest in the stuff working. And it's an order of magnitude more than for the last bull market, even though we're in, the middle of this giant bear market now. So what does that mean for the next bull market? Well, I'm optimistic, as difficult as it is to hold that optimism right now at some of these price levels. But if you see enough of these commodity cycles, because they're so quick in cryptocurrency, you see some patterns. But it's uncanny how similar, especially the fading out of the last bear market was to the bear market before that.
Yeah.
And the only thing that these bear markets or these subsequent bull markets have in common is that each one has been almost an order of magnitude higher than the one before it. So in terms of predicting the future, the next crypto bull market should be quite high. And again, you look at these numbers, like all a cryptocurrency market cap is something like 115 billion today. And well, what's the market cap of like Apple, right? Like just Jeff Bezos's net worth is higher than all cryptocurrency in the entire world. So it's still this blip. But even though it's this blip, you still have hordes of people on Reddit just like praying for institutional money. You have actual institutions evaluating it as an investment or some sort of asset diversification. You have casual retail investors who can get on board and buy something almost immediately. And you also have the tribe of libertarian hackers who want this stuff to be the future of money. And you have all of that, and all of that's still growing, even though the price is going down. Like the morale is not necessarily growing, but the baseline is definitely growing. And when you're dealing with a limited supply, the same principles apply as they did for all of the other commodity cycles, and really all the commodity cycles throughout human history, where you have certain utility and a certain scarcity and a certain level of self-reinforcement and self-perpetuating stuff. So
I think that's interesting. I think that's a nice portrayal of what, and probably I'm not as deep into it as you by any stretch of the imagination, but from what I can see, it looks like it's like, all right, this is going to slide sideways, but there is a lot more people know about it. And a lot more people seem to be interested in it. A lot more people are curious about it. And a lot more people are using it in general. So hopefully we'll see some more action and hear maybe some more exciting news the next time we get a chance to chat.
Sure. But even if it's not exciting, right? Again, the people who get rich on this stuff get rich now.
Exactly.
They're not getting rich, or I say now, like maybe they get rich after another 90% crash and those people like not necessarily now, but definitely more so now than 2017.
Right.
If the commodity cycle repeats itself exactly, that means we'd be looking at like 2021 kicking off another bull market, right? So we would have the next halvening on Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin forks is going to be in 2020. A little earlier, I think in 2016, it was the summer sometime. So it'll be a little bit before that because hash rate's always been growing. And if you look at the last one, that was in 2016. And then you got kind of a little bump for that. It was like, yeah, there's some excitement. And then beginning of 2017 is when it really saw kind of the rocket fuel. So if you're really looking at repeating that cycle, we'd see happening in 2020, some excitement, maybe a big, oh my God, it's like 30% up. And Christmas 2020 and then 2021 would be the big liftoff, ski jump kind of stuff. But that's just, that's really lazy extrapolation. But however, the last 2 years have been very similar to that.
Yeah.
So,
well, cool. Well, Joey, thank you again for updating us on Bitcoin and the shenanigans of Reddit. And we'll talk again soon.
Yep. Great to be back. All right. Have a good one.
Show notes, resources, and links from this episode can be found by going to intherabbithole.com/E284. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, just look below in the description section. And speaking of YouTube, if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to do all that YouTube stuff. Throw us a like, subscribe, and slap that bell around because bananas are yellow. With that, we wrap up episode number 284 from the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.